Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. It's Way T Lightheart from Bioptimizers with another edition of the Awesome Health Podcast. And today we're going to talk about the power of transformational travel and its regenerative potential, plus a little bit about Qigong, whatever you want to call that. We'll get into it with our expert today, who is Jessica Van Antwerp. And she is the owner and CEO of Integral Travel, providing wellness retreats and education to teach people how to unlock the natural healing capacity of their bodies while connecting with others and the planet. She draws on over a decade of experience in the health and wellness industry, as well as the wisdom she's gained through her personal struggles with anxiety, weight, low self-esteem, and addiction. There's nothing more fulfilling to her than empowering people in their own well-being and helping them heal their hearts. Jessica, welcome to the show today.
Thanks, Wade. Nice to be here. Thanks for having me.
Well, hey, we were just chatting before the podcast. You're up in smoky Colorado during the burn of 2021. We had this in 2020 out here in California, and now it seems to have spread around North America. With what a lot of people don't understand is the lack of forestry management over a course of decades by well-meaning people who the media automatically assumes that fires are bad and evil, and they certainly can cause damage to civilized environments and things like that. But they are a natural part of the cycle of how the planet works. And our forestry management system has been very myopic because it's been driven by mass hysteria, anxiety, and stuff. And there's a lack of true identification. I learned this years ago when I was coaching as CEO executive of the second largest forestry company in the world, and who was a real conscientious individual. And he was explaining the nuances of this. And there was a big dead forest out in Alberta, British Columbia area that was a big problem that they didn't manage properly because of a variety of different reasons. And this is something that I think is related to some of the things that you do. And that is, humanity has been on a pathway of industrialization and rapid technological innovation, which has kind of usurped the traditional methodologies and methods of how humans used to gather, connect, live. And increasingly, we are seeing an incredible amount of mental health issues, self-esteem issues, and the correlation of behavior that's less becoming of being a whole, healthy, happy human. Whether it's addiction, whether it is overwork, whether it's underwork, whether it's an overall sense of malaise, we're seeing this kind of go exponentially in direct proportion to the rise of technology. Can you give us a little bit of a background, maybe of what we talked about in your bio, about what your own journey maybe in the dark side of the human condition, and then how you've kind of brought yourself to the light, if you will, and are sharing that with others?
Yeah, absolutely. So I succumbed to all of the things that you just mentioned about overworking, engaging in behaviors that are, not supportive of our highest health and most vitality. It's kind of been a long and winding journey. I was an athlete growing up, so I was always fit, but I was always chubby. And looking back now, knowing what I know about nutrition, it was because, after our games, we'd just go over to the McDonald's and, eat our post-game calories that didn't have any vitamins and minerals to help our bodies actually recover from the stress that we put them under, doing what we were doing. I played volleyball. I was a swimmer. I played basketball. And so in college, I became a vegetarian, mostly because I learned about what the sickness that most animals in the mass meat industry are actually that they actually have before they're, slaughtered and then packaged up and sent to the local grocery store. And it just really opened my eyes to the food chain, essentially from the source to my mouth. So I stopped eating animals for about 5 years, but hadn't then caught up with my nutritional knowledge of how to maintain healthy iron levels, primarily. And so I became severely anemic, and I actually lost consciousness in public places twice,
Wow.
which led to me being like, okay, I think I need to eat meat again. But it also spurred more of a deep dive into nutrition and the alternate sources of iron that one can replace animal products with to maintain health, being a vegetarian. Concurrently with that, I was I was majoring in philosophy in college, and really was taken by some of the Eastern philosophical ideas. And
Quick question, quick interjection, because I'm a little bit of a secret philosopher.
okay.
So, who are your more influential philosophical influences, would you say, that you're kind of exploring? Because it's kind of an ongoing thing. You kind of try different people on at different times. And
Oh, absolutely. So I was really into contemporary philosophy, which actually is not really contemporary.
Could you explain that for people? What contemporary
Yes. So
philosophy?
contemporary philosophy, really, that word contemporary actually refers to a time period, the same way that modern and postmodern refer to a time period and like who was really leading the philosophical discussions during that time. So contemporary philosophy was like, and continental philosophy was from the European continent, primarily in like the 70s, 80s, even into the early 90s. And these were like the postmodernism. And this is where it like really wraps back into Eastern philosophy. So it was all about identity and how do you define something in the postmodern era. So take, for example, like colonialism. Like you have the Indian continent, so that's country, being colonized by Britons. So you have a generation of traditional Indians, then you have these British people coming in and influencing, mixing the culture. So the next generation that's coming up is neither fully Indian, steeped in that tradition, because they've been influenced by these British influences. And so in this global world, this kind of one world economy that we have now, there's all these like different points that people can pull from to create their own identity, right? So it's all about the web, essentially, and that identity is not fixed, but it's this ever-changing, ever-evolving experience that we have of ourselves based on the things that we are exposed to. So some of my favorite philosophers, to go back and answer your question, were Jean Baudrillard from France, Foucault, Lyotard. So again, yeah, mostly from the European continent.
All the people that Jordan Peterson's critical of these days.
Oh, I'm not familiar with Jordan Peterson.
Yeah, Jordan's a Canadian psychologist that came to power with 12 rules for life and 12 more rules, or order of chaos or whatever, I think. Recently he came to fame. So we kind of, what's interesting is right now with this, what you identified is this cross-pollination of cultures, thanks to the interconnectivity of the web,
Right.
is getting people to challenge their beliefs and identities.
Right.
And what's interesting is it gives rise to philosophical discussions, which were kind of buried for a while. Like philosophy in the tech world was kind of like, it's a bunch of like people sitting in rooms, humbling and blowing. But now we're at a philosophical and a sociological crisis, which, whether it's migrations, whether it's government policies, where it is the apparent division that I think is the product of mass media, because that's what drive, the amygdala response mechanism of a threat. It gets clickbaity. And now we're at this melting pot of, we have people who grew up, the last batch of the baby boomers who grew up in kind of the rapid industrialization and factorization, or the industrial boom.
Right.
And then we have the Gen Xers, I think, which you and I are probably in that category somewhere, something like that, which we're in between the industrialist and the tech world. And then we've got millennials and below who have been integrated completely with tech and are looking at those people and are like, what planet are you on?
Right.
And everybody's kind of interfluidly mixing with their ideas and their values and their social media page and their web page and the division, because normally there wasn't that kind of exposure to each other's groups historically. You know, you lived in your tribe and that person lived in their tribe, or you lived in your town, but the web has just created this mosh pit. And I think it's really driving a lot of anxiety for people, which philosophers are trying to, sort this out. And you bring up a great idea about identity. And I'm not to jump into your story, but I think I want to lay that on the table right now. The reason, because we have this new shift of humanity. I just had a lady on the podcast yesterday who is using AI to predict blood sugar response 33 hours in advance before you eat. That's how predictive the models are.
Wow.
Jeff Bezos' company is ordering products before you do because they can predict your behaviors. Facebook can tell the likes and dislikes of 25-year-old, like couples who have been married for 25 years better than the individual.
Right.
Okay. So now we're in so now, and then we have the rise of genetic manipulation. We have the rise of biotech, which is, we're becoming kind of cyborgs, and there's the whole singularity movement, and then some fusion between those, and then the old fashioned Homo sapien, who won out versus Cro-Magnons and Homo florentis and all that kind of, Yuval Noah Harari evolutionary biology story. So how is all that going back to that? Because I kind of jumped the gun here, but I want to get a hold of it, because I think you're going to be able to run with this in a great way. And that's why I wanted to kind of go there. What was happening for you in this situation that led you into this philosophical situation to kind of look at identity and yourself and, kind of find the Eastern philosophy? How did that emerge?
That's a really great question. And one that I don't think anyone's ever asked me. It sort of relates back to childhood wounds, and that low self-esteem piece, because the childhood wounds are, where my low self-esteem came in. I had these sort of hot, cold relationships with my two primary relationships, which were my brother and my best friend. Because my parents were divorced and they had joint custody of my brother and I. So we were back and forth between houses every 2 weeks. So we didn't have parental figures that were a constant in our lives, right? My brother was my constant.
Were they amicable, your parents, or was it very?
Absolutely. And this was before the age of, co-parenting and amicable divorces. Right. So my parents were incredible role models in that regard. And this was also before cell phones. So, we had a different phone number at each of our houses. So my friends would know, well, whose house are you at? Like, which phone number do I call?
We forget about just the logistical issues of 20 years ago, 30 years ago. It's like big.
And now it's just one phone number wherever you go. It doesn't matter if you're on the other side of the world. It's the same phone number, But anyway, my brother and my best friend were my best friend when no one else was around, and we had such a great time together and we could totally let loose. But then with both of them, as soon as anyone else would come around, they would just turn on me and humiliate me and make me the butt of their jokes and reveal stuff I had told them in confidence, secrets. And it was deeply wounding in that it sort of gave me the idea that A, I wasn't lovable, or that B, this is what love is. It's this hot and cold, continual betrayal that then they draw you back in, and then they reject you again. And so it's just this constant pain cycle. I was in a society and a culture, and I grew up in Austin, Texas, where at least in my circle of friends, where talking shit was like the way to express your love. Except I'm a really sensitive person, and I also think that there's truth in every joke. Like the fact that you make a joke about it means that it crossed your mind in the first place. So I just was getting my feelings hurt all the time, and so I had originally gotten accepted to college as a computer science major. I wanted to be a programmer. I loved the logic behind it, and I had taken a couple classes in high school. Then I decided I didn't want to sit in front of a computer all day, so I switched to be a business major, and I wanted to follow in my dad's footsteps and like be an international business person, flying around the world and making big deals between big companies. And then I started college in the business program, and it felt just like high school, like super competitive in a really unhealthy way, where people were just catty and like talking behind each other's backs and very cliquish, and it just really it didn't feel right. And meanwhile, I had taken as an elective a philosophy of religion course because I was really fascinated with the philosophy of religion and the debate about like whether there is a God. I was actually staunchly atheist when I was in high school, and very scientifically minded, like you can't prove the existence of God, therefore he doesn't exist, and this class, this philosophy of religion class, just blew my mind wide open and was like, okay, yes, no one can prove the existence of God, prove from like a logical, scientific kind of perspective, but also no one can disprove the existence of God or prove that there is no God. So,
so kind of an agnosticism is more of a sophisticated version of the quest for truth that maybe an atheist is going. So if the atheist becomes absolutely honest with their inquiry, from a scientific truth, the absence of observable phenomenon does not mean that the phenomenon itself doesn't exist. There is a limitation within the testing of us, and there needs to be an applied honesty. And I think there's two types of atheists that I've come into contact with. First, there's the atheists who are frankly atheists because of the rejections of the limitations of their oftentimes early exposure to religion and religious philosophy, and got those wounds, and for very well have become very jaded and negative towards those who pursue that as life. And then there's the rigorous, hardcore scientist who may have no exposure or indifferent, but saying, hey, if we don't have defendable proof, it doesn't exist. And if you can get past the wounds and get into honesty with oneself, or in honesty with the limitations of our cognitive process, I think it's really great to say, okay, well, we can go to agnostic, but let's go a step further than that. Like, let's continue to hold that, because what's interesting is my friends who are what I call honest, for lack of, I don't know if that's the right word, integrous atheists, have a high level of morality for the most part, oftentimes superior to that of the staunch religious. Right.
So I think it is important to distinguish, when you're talking about people's childhood wounds from being in a church, I think it's important to distinguish the wounds of a religion versus the wounds of just a belief in God.
Oh yeah. Could you share that with us? I think that would be enlightening. I never expected the conversation to go there, but this is awesome.
I know this
it's so cool.
Not on the docket, but here we are. The staunchness of religion, the religions distinguish themselves by tenets, right? By different ethos and creeds, and saying these are the rules of this religion, and this is how you should live if you believe in this religion. And so, I think it's, and I don't want to offend anybody here, but I think it's okay
to offend people. Here's a part that people don't understand about free speech, and that is the tenet of free speech means that you have the license to offend and the license to be offended. Because if you take away free speech, right, then you remove the quest for absolute truth, if that's even definable. And I think that's the consequence of that, right? So it's yeah, go ahead and offend people.
I think it gets in the way of open discussion, right? So like the choice to be offended as well as the choice to consciously offend sometimes puts a wall up between a productive and constructive conversation around the matter at hand. So I don't want to offend anyone, but
I know you don't, but feel free to do.
Okay.
So we'll
still
deal with the damage after. So I appreciate the conscientiousness from which that's emerging, and that you don't want to offend people, but invariably you will.
Yeah.
And so be it.
So my thought is that that might offend people, is that I think it's pretty arrogant to think that you know what God wants or how to interpret God's wishes for us in this lifetime on this planet. And so to say it's this specific set of rules and not that specific set of rules, that this is how God wants us to live.
Sure. That brings up a good point. That brings up a good point, because now you're talking about freedom versus tyrannical. So you're talking about, if I want to self-actualize as a human, which situation is the religious doctrine that's being propagated on a person tyrannical in its expression, or is it protective in its expression? And who makes that decision?
Right.
And what are the consequences if you choose one way or the other? And this is kind of what we're in the midst of right now.
Right.
Challenging, because before you lived in this country, you were exposed to this religious views, this culture, this dietary habits, and much of those things have emerged from the environment you come from.
Right. And so it does tie back into, our initial conversation about identity, because in a lot of, when you start to take the freedom to do this self-inquiry and really ask yourself, how do I want to live? With what ethos or creed do I want to live? And maybe question the tenets that you were brought up under, then that's very threatening to the powers in that hierarchy of, whatever religion it may be. So they don't like it when you question the rules of the religion. They just want you to follow along and sort of fall in line and obey. And so it limits your self-actualization, as you say, in terms of like finding one's identity. And so that sort of constraint, again, to kind of bring it back full circle to that wounding by the creed of the religion rather than by the spirituality or the belief in God.
Okay. Right? So what you're doing is separating the institutional doctrines from the essence of what is
at the core,
the essence versus the external appearance of doctrination.
Exactly. And this is not to say that religion doesn't have a lot of great things for a lot of people and to help them like live better, but and be more ethical people. But there's also a big guilt factor in there.
Can be.
Right. So again, to kind of like come up as a wonderful tangent, but to kind of link it back into the story, I took this philosophy of religion course, softened my stance, as we said, to agnosticism, because I was like, okay, I'm not going to be so arrogant to think that I know that there is no God. And then just decided I was so fascinated and engaged in this philosophy class, and business school was so boring and by the way, very easy, I thought. So I was like, I'm going to change my major to philosophy, much to my father's chagrin. You can't make a lot of money.
You know what? I'm done with science, Dad. I think I'm going to be a philosopher. Oh, that's a tough sell.
Yeah, exactly. He's like, what are you going to do with that? I'm like, I don't know, but it's interesting. It's fascinating.
Which ironically, there's an irony in this, because historically, the greatest thinkers of humanity were first philosophers and then went into oftentimes other fields because they were the which is interesting.
Exactly. So I'm a philosopher for hire. If for anyone who needs a thinker,
Love it.
I'm available. Let me know. But the ironic thing is, I think that I got an amazing education being a philosophy major because I was taught how to think, not what to think.
Right. Which is completely devoid of the world right now. There's very few thinking paradigms that are being taught to people, as opposed to the indoctrination of whatever political, religious, corporate philosophy, you know, and people don't know how to take arguments apart or put arguments together.
Right. And so it all, again, to link back to that industrialization piece that you sort of started the show with, is that philosophy is incredibly relevant right now because of the ethical conversation that I think is not being had. Certainly not by the people who are running these big tech companies, you know, or maybe they are, but they're still, I feel like, really not anticipating well the consequences of what it is that they're creating. Like, have you heard of Mark Zuckerberg's new thing about the metaverse? Oh my gosh, I read about it last week, but basically he wants to take our like pandemic existence of Zoom meetings into more of a virtual reality and augmented reality setting, so that you actually, instead of a 2D like screen with all your coworkers on it in a Zoom meeting, you put on goggles, VR goggles, and then you can you're actually in a meeting room with your colleagues instead of on the screen. And you can hear people from your right, you can hear people from your left, as if you are actually in the room. And he wants us to basically live our whole lives that way, to like go to the gym. And except now, since we've turned our homes into gyms, we can work out from home, but he wants us to sort of like be in this augmented virtual reality world all day, every day.
This has been predicted by advocates of the singularity.
It's the Matrix.
The Matrix was a great movie for all our young folk who I was actually on my team the other day, and I was like, well, you know, it's kind of like the movies in the Matrix, and the younger people in my company are like, what's the Matrix? And I'm like, ooh. You know, but what's fascinating is that movie came out, the first one came out in 1999.
Whoa.
Right. Whoa. Yeah. Right. And what was interesting, I mean, that's like razor phones and flip, like that was kind of cool, but it was very indicative. And what's interesting, that philosophy fits very concordantly with the Bhagavad Gita. If you get into the second and third, particularly the philosophical aspects of the ancient Indian spiritual texts, kind of correlate within that movie. I can see the influence because having studied that extensively and seeing the influence within that. And then there's also this kind of, you know, this AI driven monster and the thing between humanity. And then of course, what's fascinating, and this was confirmed by this AI tech person who was on our team yesterday, who I think has high ethics, who says that the singularity is inevitable, she believes. Wow. And that we actually won't know when we've merged with it.
Whoa.
Yeah. And she has a background in tech. She has a background in tech, in finance, in government, and in private or public philanthropy, private and public philanthropy. Wow. And she's back into tech because she says probably market dynamics is what drives most successful proliferation. She's trying to help pre-diabetics and diabetics manage their blood sugar. But this brings up this topic is like, here we are trying to find health, trying to find our identity in a, I think gender fluidity is one thing. Yep. And then yet at the same time, we've never been more tagged and bagged, if you will, with now we see the biodigital convergence that is coming out on government websites. We've got this whole vaccine agenda that's moving forward with digital passports. We've got the World Economic Forum suggesting that we need to reimagine the world in a new economic process where we have, biodigital, biometrics, financial information, all put into one system, which is you toe the line, you get the credits. You don't toe the line, you get penalized for this. And we're seeing this within social media algorithms. And of course, the impact for the young folks who have grown up with completely immersed in tech.
Right.
The digital world for them is kind of like me in the real world. Like that is their real world. And the real world for them is like me and you, like kind of coming into the digital world. Like it's inverted. And I think a lot of people don't recognize that.
Right.
The significant variance in the world that we've grown up in between, say, baby boomers like my parents who can barely run a cell phone, to kids nowadays who are integrated on iPads from the time they're 2.
I know. My niece was like, knew how to like swipe and tap and what she was doing on a screen before she could walk, practically, it's just crazy. And how do you find an identity in a digital world where you are on so many different platforms and you can create whatever identity you want? But it's not really, but it's more of it's the identity that you're choosing to show rather than the real you,
Kind of like a straw man in a sense, right?
Right. Oh man, it's my.
So how did this tie back to you? Because this is the long introduction into a story I've ever had on the show. My apologies, but when I discover there's a fellow philosopher coming on, I'm like, I'm in. I'm going all in. Forget everything else. Let's get into this.
Philosophers are known for, it's just going on and on and on and following this tangent and that tangent and this tangent. And if you
you've got this crisis.
Yeah,
you got this philosophy. You broke from your traditional, kind of streamline. You're like, I got to get my philosophy figured out. I got some old wounds going on here. I've gone from a former atheist to maybe an agnostic.
Yep.
And then the next part.
And I'm trying to figure out who I want to be. And so I actually decided that I needed to leave. Well, I had actually, and then I even softened my stance from agnosticism even more because I had this amazing like spiritual awakening experience that was like, okay, there is something. And it was so mundane, the setting, I was on a road trip driving from Texas to Yellowstone. I got a summer job in Yellowstone in between my junior and senior years of college. And I was driving up there and it was raining and I was actually just north of Denver and the clouds were hanging really low, but over to the west, you could see where the clouds ended and you could see the continental divide on the other side of the clouds. And it was just like glistening with still snow covered and like glowing in the sunshine. And so I'm like driving, 70 miles an hour on I-25 and I'm like, can barely keep my eyes on the road because I want to look at this beautiful scene. And then at one point I turned back to face the road. And in front of me in the sky, there was this just like opening in the clouds that just went from horizontal to straight vertical. And the clouds were like this teal color that I had never seen before. And it was just this full body, like almost like I could hear angels singing. And I just started crying. And I was like, okay, something is greater than me out there. There's something else. But again, I didn't deign to say like, I know what this being or energy or whatever wants or needs. So it was a big spiritual awakening that then spurred me to move to Colorado, which is why I chose Colorado, because it happened in Colorado after I graduated college. And that was in a conscious decision to get out of that, group of friends who decided that in order to show their love, they were going to make you feel, and just like break you down and make fun of you. And I was like, I don't want to engage with people like that. So in order to define my identity again, I left and I just totally reinvented myself in Colorado. And I
hero's journey begins.
Yeah, dove deeper into my exploration of nutrition. And I was still a vegetarian at that time, got deeper into Eastern philosophies. So that continental philosophy was kind of tying into the Eastern philosophies of like, you are not a fixed identity. It's always changing, ever moving. It's the Tao, the way. Of just the Tao, the Wu way. Just being in flow. And then I was bartending and not like, didn't have any responsibility, just really enjoying like playing chess and being a philosopher and
I was a
you
bartender
know,
one time too,
yeah.
after my sojourn as a doorman. So
Oh,
I
nice.
fought my way to the bar. And, I think bartending, it's an underestimated view of life.
Oh,
And
yeah.
you become a philosopher if you're a bartender.
Exactly. Yeah. And you
It
also
is,
sort of become a therapist.
you become a lot of things when you're a
Yeah.
bartender.
People like going up to your bar telling you all their problems. You're like, we just met. Like, okay. Well, and that is part of my story. I decided after 4 years of doing that I wanted to help people. I wanted to have more tangible skills to be able to help people because people were just spilling their guts to me and just pouring their hearts out. And all I could do is just sort of like nod and be like, wow, yeah, and offer
That's
real.
part of the interesting aspect of alcohol, right? So it oftentimes remove inhibitions that
Right.
maybe someone is paralyzed to communicate their vulnerabilities.
Right.
Though they don't have that defense mechanism gets limited from the alcohol and outpours,
Right.
the stresses of the human condition and
Right.
the
Right.
Mars of the soul under those circumstances. And you either become, as a bartender, you either become really jaded party animal or you become an empathetic philosopher. That's what I find. And
Yeah.
it's fascinating to watch because you see people stripped down and often,
Right. Yeah.
after midnight, boy, you get to see the base drives of humanity pretty,
Yeah.
pretty, it's pretty
It's
clear.
yeah, it can be kind of ugly and scary.
Yeah, we're monkeys
But,
with phones, right?
yeah. Okay. Yeah. Um, but meanwhile, at this time of my life, I was also, well, I wasn't struggling with addiction yet because I didn't even know that I was addicted, but I was addicted to weed. And so I was just
Oh,
smoking like all day, every day from
like the
the
wake
time
and
when
bake
I woke.
program.
Oh yeah, up until like it was the first thing I did when I woke up, and it was the last thing I did before I went to bed, and it was just constant throughout the day.
Uh-huh.
And
What was that like?
uh, well, I was a very high functioning stoner. Nobody knew that
I had a friend just like that. She'd be just stoned permanently
permanently. Yep.
and was very functional.
This went on for 7 years of my life,
Wow.
of which I don't really have a memory. Like friends are like, "Oh, do you remember that time?" I'm like, "Nope, sure don't." But
It's
it
very
wasn't until
interesting how that is, isn't it? Is it like there is some interesting
yeah.
components to,
Oh, absolutely.
yeah.
I didn't have a lot of responsibility, so it wasn't really an issue until I started to get older, like in my later 20s, and I was like, I don't want to be stoned all the time. But then I found that I didn't know how to be sober. And because I
Right.
wasn't comfortable being sober, I wasn't comfortable with myself.
Yeah.
And that was like tied back into my childhood wounds of like, I'm not lovable. Like whoever I open myself up to and become emotionally vulnerable with is just going to turn around and hurt me. So smoking weed and being stoned all the time was my way. It was like a shield essentially.
Right.
And in this case, like a smoke shield, like I could be physically present, get my social needs met, but not be fully mentally there and certainly not be emotionally available.
Do you think that, do you think that softened maybe, smoking pot was a way of softening maybe the sensitivities that you had to what people said or things or something that
Oh,
let kind of just stay even
yeah,
keel during that time. So
yeah,
it's kind of like self-medication for the
absolutely.
unaddressed, maybe emotional traumas that were anchored in your nervous system.
Yes, that's
Mm.
exactly what it was.
Okay.
And so it wasn't until, again, I wanted to change my relationship and not be with the plant and not be under its influence all the time and actually be sober that I
Was there a
realized,
moment? Was there a moment? Sorry to interject.
no, it
No,
was sort of
it just as a general
gradual.
thing is like,
Yeah. It was like, this is a little crazy. Like when you have a line item in your budget for, specifically for your substances, like that,
Yeah.
that's an
Yeah,
issue.
and it keeps increasing.
Yeah.
It's like, you know what? We need to cut back on food here.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know,
Like what
I
are my
could
priorities?
downsize my house and get more weed.
Yeah, exactly. And what are my priorities right now? So it was sort of a gradual thing, but then when I couldn't, and I'd say, okay, I'm not gonna smoke until X time or whatever, but then I'd find myself like with a bowl in my hand and the lighter in my hand, and then I'd be high like before I even knew it, and I was like, I don't even want to be high any like right now or anymore. And that I started to do more of an introspective inquiry of like, why
Right.
why am I doing this? And that's when I discovered my childhood wounds and discovered all this stuff now that I'm just like, oh yeah, it's because of this.
How did you do that? Was there a process that you initiated or just self-inquiry? Like, was there a
Yeah.
group? Was there anything that you were doing? This was a completely solo act.
Yeah. Yeah. And it took years. I mean, it's
Amazing.
not like it happened overnight
Amazing.
or in a month. It took a couple years at least to come to the root of the issue. And then a couple more years to actually like get over it. Where I had to actually reconcile my wounding with the reality of the friend base that I had, which was super loving and loyal and kind and fun. And they were like the greatest friends. And they gave me no reason to need to put up a shield or anything like that. So I was slowly able to unwind myself from it and cut back and cut back. And then there was a moment where I was like, okay, I'm going sober for the next year.
Right.
And I went 15 months. I went more than a year. And it was amazing. And that was sort of the beginning of I feel like my more like, well, definitely the beginning of my self-love journey, moving from low self-esteem into a greater sense of self-appreciation and self-love, and learning how to be present with people and in a sober way, and still have fun. And in fact, feel more alive and more joy. And so concurrently with this, there's everybody's life story is so multi-dimensional, about 10 years ago, a little less than 10 years ago, rather, during this time when I was still smoking a lot, I had the honor of becoming the director of business development for a wellness center here in Boulder. This is after I went to massage school, which is also part of the story of self-healing, and getting a lot of those emotions kind of dredged up from the tissues of the body. And so that they could then express themselves out. Yeah. And got a job immediately after graduating with a massage place, and who happened to be run by my shiatsu teacher in school. And he was the guy who taught me Qigong. And Qigong for me was like this magic portal that just opened. I had always been fascinated by the concept of energy, but I always felt it was like a little subjective. That like, how do I know that whatever you're saying about the energy is really what's happening? But Qigong enabled me to feel energy in the palms of my hands.
Right.
Like
totally changes everything, because now you're not operating from some, Marvel superhero movie of energy and prana, chi, whatever you want to call that. It's like, no, I actually feel the heat in my hands. I feel the energy flowing through my nervous system. I can touch points on people and feel hot and cold, or pick up emotions. And we have this whole array of sensory information that's not coming from our traditional senses.
Right. And this, I think it's like kind of an esoteric topic in some people's minds, but really, I've been able to kind of like zoom out and be like, oh, all of these experiences that we've all had in our lives, right? We're all manifestations of energy. Like, I'm sure you've walked into a room and you have known you've just interrupted two people arguing, because you can just feel the tension in the air, right? Like even the expression, you could cut that tension with a knife. you walked into a room or a party, and you know when two people are attracted to each other, or you have that experience from across the room of like being attracted to another person. That is qi. That's energy. And qigong is the practice of then consciously manipulating the energy of your body to get things moving where they're stuck, to let them go out of your body, and to make way for fresh, pure qi. It's all about flow, right? Like you have a stagnant pond, and you get all sorts of algae and scum. And if you've ever done any like backcountry hiking, people always tell you, don't drink water from a still water source. You always, because it has bacteria in it. It'll make you sick. And that's what's happening in our bodies, in this sedentary lifestyle that we have. You know, we're 70-something% water, our bodies. And if we have this sedentary lifestyle, no wonder we're manifesting disease, because there's all this stagnant stuff in our bodies.
And to take one step further, if we look physics, we're mostly empty space.
Right.
So the concept of water is a biochemical view. And so what people aren't realizing is biology is a look at kind of like a band of light on a rainbow.
Right, exactly.
Okay, so we're in orange.
Right.
But if you want to go to physics, you're into the photons and you're into the waves.
Right.
Which we're mostly empty space.
And even more recently, string theory, right? Like everything, I mean, physics says, and this is, I'm so glad you brought this up, because this is what I use to kind of ground it in science, because I still have that science mind, you know, that Qigong is not this super esoteric practice. It sounds exotic and foreign because it's a Chinese word. But really it means energy cultivation or energy exchange. And the basic concept is that we are just vibration. Matter, everything that the universe is made up of, matter is energy vibrating at specific frequencies, at specific magnitudes, and that vary and that come in different combinations. And that's what differentiates the vibration of my shirt from the vibration of the microphone and the computer at my desk, you know? And so learning the practice of Qigong to consciously manipulate your own energetic frequency and create more space in your body for qi to flow, for fluids to flow, for everything to flow, creates health, creates the space for the energetic processes of your body to do their thing, versus becoming super contracted and dense and sort of bracing yourself against life. Like you feel like, you know, all of your obligations and responsibilities are kind of crushing you, and you're just doing your best to kind of keep up. That you're, and I see this in my massage practice all the time, is that people have become so dense in their bodies, they don't know how to relax. And that's preventing their bodies from operating at optimal function, right? And so Qigong is the practice of energy cultivation, of consciously letting go of that which is stressing you out, and opening yourself to a different possibility, to the wonders of the universe and the power of the universe. Like qi is the force that moves the planets in its orbits. And this is the energy that you're calling into your body. Imagine the healing power that that energy has. Like you can heal from anything. You can reverse chronic disease with this practice. And, you know, some other things, you need to keep your body moving with some physical exercise, keep your heart healthy, definitely have good nutrition on board. But for me, Qigong is the foundation, because it's how I defeat stress. And that kind of ties back into my story as well. So after I had discovered Qigong in massage school, it was amazing. It was mind-blowing. I started practicing, and then I became the director of business development for this massage place. We were opening up a new location in North Boulder, and I started working like 90 hours a week to get this thing off the ground. Like at my computer.
The power of entrepreneurship and its ability to like drive you into the toilet.
Yeah, I know. It's so ironic. And like opening a wellness center of all things, you know what I mean? Like it's one thing to be in tech and nothing health and wellness related.
I think I should write a book for wellness facilities. of how to heal from your healing clinic.
Yeah. Exactly. It's like, I know so many acupuncturists who go into like really intense, like they want to get out of school as quickly as possible so that they can start practicing, so they condense the 4-year program into 3 years, and then they graduate with adrenal fatigue. You
Yes.
know, they're like, and they have to spend that 4th year just healing themselves before they feel well enough to be able to go into practice. So it's a similar concept, but during that time,
Maybe it cultivates empathy for the patient.
yeah, exactly. So you can understand what people are going through, makes you a better practitioner.
Absolutely.
So I, meanwhile, working 90 hours a week, totally lost track of all my own practices. I stopped doing yoga. I stopped exercising. I was drinking lots of coffee because I was so tired, then drinking beer at night to relax. And I had stopped smoking weed, so I wasn't stoned, which was good, but I started smoking cigarettes.
Right.
Just to like have an excuse to step outside and get away from the computer for 5 minutes while I'm inhaling this toxic air, you know? And
nicotine's a very interesting nootropic.
I don't know much about it.
Yeah. So nicotine, first and foremost, I think a lot of people go on a little tangent there, because I always look at addiction from both, I think maybe a psychological component, but I always say that when the body is seeking out something in a chemical outlet, there is both an innate wisdom and an innate consequence to that wisdom. And so that it is seeking out some sort of alleviation or acceleration of something. And so in a highly cognitive load, oftentimes caffeine is a stimulant that can injure, norepinephrine, cortisol, and these type of things. So it can get you going in a tired thing for performance, although used excessively has problems. Nicotine, traditional native healing modality, has definitive cognitive benefits, and one of the only drugs that upregulates the more you take it, it's a fascinating product. And my friend Paul Chek uses nicotine extensively in organic nicotine, which he does in a vape bag as a cognitive enhancer with a bunch of herbs and essential oils and stuff. And if you ever have a chance to smoke one of those bags with Paul, I highly recommend it. He's a Qigong practitioner and pretty.
Oh, wow. We'd have something to talk about.
And weed, as you were talking about, was a way for you to manage unmanageable emotions because of its desensitizing factor that allowed you to maybe deal with conflictive emotions that you didn't have the tools for. So anytime that someone uses a drug per se, I always go, the drug is the best possible choice with that person to deal with the circumstances that are going on, but then may be the progenitor of a new set of problems, which may lead you to a new set of discoveries. So, so there's so much judgment around things. And what's fascinating is in the 1920s, Dr. Koch, who was a cancer researcher, when virtually everybody smoked, could find only 2 cases of lung cancer. And the lung cancer rose exponentially in the 1950s when they went to the chemicalization of cigarettes. So for those who are listening that are smokers, we're not making judgment. What I would say, smoke organic tobacco or use it in a vape machine, but then also recognize what is the benefit that you feel that you get from smoking, the smoke break, the stimulation of the nicotine from a cognitive focus part, the classic artist smoking cigarettes as he writes the next paragraph, or sitting there while he contemplates, the next painting or her with the nice sculpture or whatever, that classic thing. Well, there's something to that. And different neurochemical domination is going to give you more indication whether you would like that or not. Some people would have nicotine and they'd throw up on the spot. Some people are like, oh, laser.
Right.
The Bioptimizer mission is to help more of the world fix their digestion at a core level. The truth is, your digestion is only as good as your enzyme levels. Imagine trying to build a house with a tree. It's impossible. You need to chop the tree down into small pieces. Similarly, in order for your food to be used by your body, it must be broken down into a bioavailable form. And that's what enzymes do. converting protein into amino acids, fats into specific fatty acids, and carbohydrates into usable energy units. We start out with an abundance of enzymes, and that's why kids can digest just about anything really quickly. The thing is cooking food kills enzymes as they cannot survive at temperatures above 118 degrees. So years of this ends up depleting our bodies and leads to weak digestion. Taking digestive enzymes like masszymes, which has an incredibly high level of protease for digesting protein, as well as other critical enzymes like lipase, amylase, and others is a total game changer. Suddenly you strengthen your digestion, eliminate gas and bloating, boost metabolism, and multiply your energy. Most importantly, you fix your digestion at a core level. To get started with Masszymes and to save 10% on your first order, go to masszymes.com. That's MASSZYMES.com and use the code MASS10, MASS10.
Right. Right. And that kind of ties back into my story in terms of like what I was using it for. Like, to me, the substance use is like almost the symptom and not the cause, where it's like it's the self-medication, like what you're treating.
Absolutely.
With. And so if you can find another way to fill that same need or accomplish that same, get to that same activation that the substance is providing you without the substance, that's some ninja action.
Yes.
You know what I mean?
Yes. So how to actively engage without advocacy or guilt, right?
Right.
Is not an easy path. Right. To recognize the innate sense within ourselves and the drives from which the unconscious drives, which are leading that behavior, which every behavior that we have is at some level trying to get us to some sort of equanimity or achievement or goal or the homeostasis or, there's some kind of thing going on.
Right. Right. And it's almost like the substances sort of like expand your inner map. Right.
Yes.
They show you what's possible that maybe you couldn't access on your own before. And then your task is to then learn how to access that same state without the substance, right? That's what Ken Kesey and Tim Leary and all those dudes did with LSD. They were tripping all the time back in the 60s, but then all of them turned to transcendental meditation to reach the same mental states of connectivity and sort of oneness.
Yeah. And I would say that Ram Dass probably got it and Timothy Leary kind of dropped. Right. Most people don't realize that they were concordant folks. Ram Dass seemed to make the break beyond the drugs.
Right.
Where Tim, I think the collateral damage of his experimentation compromised him later in life. And so that's the question I think is always on my mind when engaged in the use of pharmaceutical integration or experimentation.
Right.
And the higher up the map, I use a reference guide for people to kind of navigate this, and you may be familiar. I don't know if you've ever read Dr. Hawkins' Map of Consciousness.
No.
It's a brilliant illustration. He was a 50-year psychiatrist that ran the largest psychiatric practice in history and had a massive spiritual experience after deep addiction, and ultimately cultivated this map of consciousness of everything that's potential within the human condition, and goes from 0 to 1,000, which is an exponential chart, and categorizes self-view, worldview, God view, process, in the emotional state. Beautiful illustration. And what's fascinating, the further you kind of go up into, a more realized or expansive view of world, the both opportunity and consequence of decisions have exponential cascading effects. So, for example, if you have, a broke guy living on the street who's doing heroin, and kind of joining out, and he's kind of an angry, frustrated kind of person, the impact to society is not that much.
Right.
If the president of the United States decides to take up that process, the effects could, be translated into complete annihilation of the world.
Yeah. Yeah.
So you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like the consequences of awareness in the choices are both they're relative to the amount of power one has, and power is relative to the state of awareness that one has, or certain circumstances. And so the old saying is, with great power comes great responsibility, and conversely, absolute power corrupts absolutely. And so you have these two interesting components.
Right.
When the history of the world is basically people who acquired a tremendous amount of power and fell victim to it and tried to take over the world, and were fought off by someone else who was trying to take over the world. And it was
right.
So I'm curious about your experimentation with these different. You're at the clinic, and now you've gone from Qigong and yoga practice to drinking and smoking again, and overworking from what it is. How did you fall into that? Because I think there's people that are listening to that might find that. And then, did you transcend that? And if so, how so?
Well, it was a gradual thing. Like, I was never completely sober. So even when I was doing Qigong and yoga, I would go enjoy a beer at night. And so it wasn't like a total substitution thing where I just like gave up doing Qigong and yoga and like turned to beer. And I had, like, socially smoked. I've never had an addictive relationship with nicotine. I feel very lucky in that way. Like, I haven't smoked in probably a cigarette in probably 10 years, but back when I was kind of a little more, again, like experimenting, I could pick it up and put it down and not have any issues with it. So it was just, at that time, it was just one of those things that I was doing to get myself away from the computer. And so that was like, what I needed. And so it was just sort of a gradual process of like becoming busier and my to-do list becoming longer, and like, okay, well, I am having trouble calming my mind or stilling my mind during yoga or during Qigong practice. So I'll just let my mind keep going while I'm smoking or drinking. And I was not able to transcend it before hitting rock bottom. So I had a nervous breakdown. Is what it ultimately led to. And
how long did it take to kind of get to
the?
How long to get the nervous breakdown?
Not long. 6 months, 4 months.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, somewhere between 4 and 6 months into this process of just like being overworked, under-rested. It didn't take long. And I mean, I was also on the board of directors for a shiatsu program, developing another an advanced shiatsu training program that was like 240 or 300 hours that I was then taking as a student at the wellness center. So it was all very like intermingling, and I was like in the shiatsu workshop and, / managing the wellness center. Like, when I just, my boss was in the class with me. He was also in the shiatsu program. It's a very close community here in Boulder. Once you get into, the health and wellness, and particularly like bodywork training, and specifically shiatsu. So there was just, I think it was something that he had said that just triggered me, and I just lost it. And I had felt it coming on. I was getting more and more sensitive. Like, people would say my name, and I just felt like glass was shattering inside my body. Like, I was just, I'm giving everything that I have. I have nothing else to give. What do you want from me?
I know that feeling. I've been there. I get it.
Yeah. It's not a good feeling, And so I had this breakdown, and then that day into the wellness center walks a gentleman who said, "Oh, I'm here to talk to someone about teaching Qigong classes here." And I was like, "Well, I'm the person you need to talk to. I have some experience with Qigong. Why don't we go into the studio? You can show me the particular style that you teach." And he teaches a style called Shengzhen Gong, which is unconditional love. Shengzhen means unconditional love. And And I immediately felt its power. I went from feeling chi in the palms of my hands to feeling it in my entire body. And I felt my heart. It was like that scene from The Grinch where his heart like grows 3 times and it like busts out of its little box, you know?
Yeah.
I felt that in my whole body. And I was like, this is my medicine. And I dove into that practice. Within a month, I was at a 5-day meditation retreat with Master Li Junfeng, who's the founder of Shengzhen. He was the women's China national wushu martial arts coach for over a decade, led them to like 50 something individual gold medals. He's a Kung Fu star in Kung Fu movies in China. He was Jet Li's coach for a while. So this guy knows what he's doing with relation to energy and chi. And I practiced every day for 6 months before I felt normal. Meanwhile, very little had changed about my external circumstances. And I think this is the like key that I really want anyone who's listening to understand is like, sometimes there's not a lot you can do about your stressors in your life, your responsibilities, your obligations, the things that you have to do. But what you can do is change your relationship to them. So I went from feeling like the world was just crushing me, all of my obligations and responsibilities I was drowning in, to doing this practice of Shengzhen Gong and becoming bigger than my circumstances through merging with the universe, through cultivating this energy, getting rid of anything stagnant in my body and calling in fresh, pure chi. I was tapping into connecting with the infinite part of myself that exists, and therefore the infinite part of everything. And all of a sudden I was bigger than my circumstances, and I could like look down at my to-do list and be like, oh yeah, no problem, you know? So that's the power of Qigong, and it helped me heal from this nervous breakdown. So and it's not, you know, the end of my story continues. But those were, you know, I think we hit on all the points that you mentioned, like low self-esteem, childhood wounding, anxiety, addiction, and Qigong for me has been the sort of panacea that has helped me defeat stress, which, as you know, is the sort of silent killer, right? As a lot of people are coming to learn, like we can take all the supplements we want, and we can have the healthiest diet and exercise really well, but if your stress isn't under control, then your body isn't operating at its peak function, right? Your body isn't focused on healing the cut that you sustained, like, you know, chopping veggies for your smoothie or whatever. Like when you're in fight or flight mode, your body is focused on survival. It literally changes the way your eyes focus, changes the way your blood flows in your body. It is focused on short-term survival and not long-term healing. And so dealing with your stress is the best thing you can do for your health. And it's hard because it's not as easy as just taking a pill in the morning and being like, okay, check, got that done. It takes time, and it takes time to learn the practice or learn any practice. I mean, Qigong is what worked for me, but different things work for different people. And it's a lot harder than just checking something off the to-do list. And I can tell you there's been countless times where I've been in my Qigong practice having a really hard time calming my mind, or some emotional thing has been dredged up from the depths of my being, and I'm just like crying, grieving, whatever, or feeling the pain that I never felt before, but I'm still moving. I'm still doing my Qigong practice, you know, still flowing with it, because that's the flow, is you got to let it out in order to heal from it. You can't just stuff it down inside your body.
Brilliantly said. And so I think that, first off, thank you for sharing the nuances of your particular story. I think there's a lot of people that will be able to relate to that. So I want to honor that. But let's switch gears into now that you get this experimental journey we call life, and your own hero's journey to come back to health and healing. And kind of now, you know, I always say there's really 4 stages of the human condition. There is the victim, the person where the circumstances happens to. right? And they kind of in the if you're watching a movie, they're the people that get wheeled away in the ambulance or the fire department. You don't really hear about them, right?
Right.
Other than if you're in a victim support group or something. And then there's the villain, the person that took that wound that happened to them from being human,
Right.
and said, I'm going to get back at everybody through malevolence.
Right.
Right. And then there's the hero that was a victim of some villain,
right,
and found a way to transcend and defeat the villain or the aspects of the villain, and develop a new sense of wisdom around it. And so without the villain, the hero would not become a hero, because he had to overcome, or she had to overcome, this particular obstacle or this hurt or this wound that's happening
right,
within themselves. And then finally, the last stage of that journey is one becomes the mentor, the guide, the person who has been a victim, defeated the villain, whatever the villain may be, and is now in a position to advise or provide insight to the victim who seeks to overcome the villain
right.
in their life, whether that is an internal or an external villain. And so it would seem to me that you've kind of arrived at the stage of mentorship or wisdom, like, the wise person on the hill, or the magician, or whatever happens to be that always shows up in the story, the little guiding light, if you will, for other people. Can you talk about what you're currently doing, and how your experience has given you insight to people who may be suffering and struggling, and to find this place of well-being within themselves?
Absolutely. So I'm currently, as you mentioned in the very, very beginning of the show, the CEO and owner of Integral Travel, which is at its peak is a wellness retreat company. That's sort of like the pinnacle of what we offer, our multi-day experiences of just immersing into an exploration of one's inner terrain while on an experience or an adventure, and exploring an outer terrain that's unfamiliar, potentially exotic, but just new, because the newness provides, I think it helps shed light and give perspective on what you're confronting and learning about yourself through the internal practices that we do: yoga, Qigong, meditation. And it takes you out of your day-to-day routine, so that you can sort of look back at that day-to-day routine and ask yourself, okay, what aspects of this are working for me, supporting my health, my vitality, making me feel really good? What aspects of my daily life are not so good? What do I want to change? And that's the magic of kind of going on retreat and giving conscious attention to your life and yourself, as opposed to just going on vacation, right? And then distracting yourself with activities. A retreat is different. The retreat is about that inner reflection to the effect of change, long-term change in your life, for your betterment, whether it's physical, emotional, mental, spiritual. So we provide, curated multi-day experiences in amazing locations around the world that always incorporate some nature time, which is incredibly healing in and of itself, and treatments, massage, cranial sacral, Reiki treatments, sometimes astrology readings, which can be fun and informative if, whether or not you believe in them, with just little chats, like when we can get as personal or stay as sort of distant as people want. But one of the greatest gifts, I think, that the program has to offer is a space to just be, and to speak about whatever it is that's on your heart or on your mind in a non-judgmental space, without other people offering you advice or interrupting you. That it's one person speaks at a time, shares their story, and inevitably that's the most valuable part of the retreat for a lot of people, is just being heard for whatever it is that they're speaking about. So yeah, that's our wellness retreats again are sort of the pinnacle of what we have to offer, but we offer education kind of at every level down to just daily practices. So I teach two online Qigong classes of the Shengzhen style every week. That are by donation. So there's no financial obligation. If you're stressed out, you need a break, you want to learn some skills that will help you on a daily basis, tune in. We have a suite of free meditations that are also available to help people relax, anywhere from 3 to 14 minutes. They're not, it's not.
Where do people find all this information? Like the people to kind of get, like, they'll just, where do we go? How do we get there?
Integraltravel.com. So integral is spelled INTEGRAL, travel.com. You'll find the meditations all free. You'll find the link to the online Qigong class. There's also an intro to Qigong course if you want to learn more about sort of like the theory behind it and the science behind it. You can sign up for that course. We're about to release a suite of cleanses from some amazing colleagues of mine, nutritionists, acupuncturists, chiropractors. And we have some videos on YouTube also on the Integral Travel channel that are just movements for a pain-free and healthy lifestyle, stretches to ease your pain patterns or just keep healthy spine and healthy joints. So we're sort of offering everything that we incorporate into the retreats on an individual basis also. So if you're not ready to just jump from 0 to 100 into a multi-day retreat with us, then we have some other tools that you can start to incorporate and try out and just see how they affect your daily life.
Beautifully said. And thank you for sharing that. We'll put all the notes on this in the show notes for those who skipped over or can't get it. So just click on the links and check out, your offerings, which are very generous by nature. And so what do you see for the future for yourself, the business, your life, now that you're in this kind of place of mentorship? What's expanding for you in your own personal journey as opposed to just what's happening for what you're doing for other people?
In my personal journey, I recently got married.
Awesome. Congratulations.
Guy. Thank you. It's been 2.5 months.
Wow.
Yeah. And it's just, marriage itself was something that I didn't anticipate. I kind of always wanted, but I just didn't have much luck in the romantic realm. And I met this man, and he just is the most incredible, amazing, awe-inspiring, so full of life man. And so we got married, and I'm finding within this the safety of a truly loving relationship that I'm accessing even deeper layers of healing for myself and uncovering like old patterns that I didn't even have any awareness of, before this. And so it's offering even more healing. And we have an amazing home in the mountains outside Boulder, Colorado, and we're doing house projects and expanding business. My private practice is going really well and growing and working one-on-one with people. And that's historically been massage therapy. So I'm trying to sort of like bust out of that box of massage therapy and come into a more well-rounded kind of coaching role with people, because I have so many other tools and knowledge at hand. But ultimately trying to grow Integral Travel and to be the full-time gig and just be leading retreats and helping more than one person at a time. That's really the goal. It's like, yeah.
Well, Jessica, you have outlined very much our own philosophy from what we call sick to superhuman, the pathway to biological optimization, which involves a multifaceted approach from, exercise, nutrition, and ultimately leads you to a place of spiritual inquiry at its highest level. And, this whole thing of the human existence is somewhat of a tragic comedy in some ways. It can be very dark and brooding, and it can hit the highest pinnacles of it. And everyone's going to experience some variance within it. And before we move on to the next plane, whatever that might be. I wish you well in your journey, and as well invite other people who have listened to this podcast and found some connection to you, your story, and how you've been able to transcend some challenges. I think is very valuable, and appreciate you coming on the podcast.
Thank you for giving me the opportunity to share the story. I think it's from my own experience being in the health and wellness industry and like looking at people that I've admired over the years, it, oftentimes it can seem so unattainable, like, well, that person is just skinny and beautiful and in shape and just totally vibrant because she's always been that way or he's always been that way. But that's not the case, and so learning about the struggles that we've gone through to get to where we are and the tools that we've used to help us get to where we are, I think is really helpful and valuable for other people. So if I can do it, anyone can do it.
Absolutely. And I think Brendan Burchard said in one of his events that I attended, honor the struggle. To be human is to struggle, and not struggling for the sake of struggling, but the struggle is worth the struggle. For within the struggle comes the development of a deeper sense of awareness and humility, which is the pathway to freedom, to health, and to healing. And so I want to honor that in you, and I want to invite all our listeners to check out your site, and more importantly, maybe try a retreat. Maybe if you're a little bit stressed out, you're a little bit pushed to the limit, or you're not following what you need to do, maybe it's time to take a break, step back, activate your own energy, get your own chi flowing, maybe check out one of your retreats and enjoy this thing called life, because you can't stop it until it stops.
Yeah. So true. Well said.
That's our message today, folks. I hope you enjoyed this edition of the Bioptimizers Awesome Health Podcast. You can like it, share it, give us your comments. We appreciate it all. And more importantly, thank you again, Jessica, for joining us today. I hope you enjoyed the show, and we'll see you on the next one. Take care. Lots of love.
And now for a Bioptimizers fixed digestion tip. Turn cultured foods into superfoods. Raw fermented foods like sauerkraut and low sugar live yogurt can be good for you, but rarely have enough of the right probiotic strains for therapeutic benefit. So here's a way that you can turn them into superfoods. What I do is I get some raw sauerkraut or a healthy yogurt. Ideally, it's grass-fed or coconut-based, and you can empty 3 caps of P3OM into a container and mix it up thoroughly. Leave it at room temperature for a couple of hours before putting it back into the fridge. And what's going to happen is these probiotic levels will be multiplied. In fact, it doubles every 20 minutes. And then what you're going to get is you're going to have a food with strong proteolytic activity. To learn more about P3OM and why its patented strains make it the strongest probiotic available, go to www.bioptimizers.com.
Thank you for listening to the Bioptimizers Awesome Health Podcast. You can find more information at bioptimizers.com.